So when we're looking at the contracts and there's going to be inclusions and exclusions, what
Yes.
kind of examples, like what kind of examples could you provide in the sense of like when you are doing a contract regarding inclusions and exclusions?
Okay, very important question. You guys asking good questions today. Okay, so inclusions, exclusions, very important. Okay, so inclusions and exclusions have to do with attached and unattached goods. So here's how it works, right? So think of inclusion would be from what the buyer wants left behind. Okay, so think of inclusion as a buyer like thing, right? And exclusion, well, it can be both, but for the most part, like exclusions would be something that the seller wants to take with them. Okay, so let's say somebody has a chandelier, right? They have this fancy antique chandelier in their dining room. They want to take that. The seller has listed the property for sale, but they do not want to give that chandelier. They want to take it with them. So in that case, that would be an exclusion on the purchase contract and the service agreement because the seller wants to take that with them, right? So this is what seller is selling except that, right? So that's what exclusion is. So I want to sell everything except this part, right? So exclusion is an attached good that the seller wants to take with them. Okay, so that's an exclusion. Inclusion, on the other hand, is an unattached good that either the seller is leaving behind with the house or the buyer wants the seller to leave behind with the house. Okay, so inclusions would be things like fridge, stove, right, washer, dryer. So these are all items that are not permanently attached, right? So these are not permanently attached to the property, and seller is including, they're leaving it behind, so they're including with the property. Okay, so exclusions are unattached goods that the seller is leaving with the property. So that's one aspect of it. Or it could be an attached good, it could be an unattached good that the buyer wants the seller to leave behind. So for example, if there's a swing set in the backyard and the buyer wants the seller to leave the swing set behind because they have young children who could use the swing set. So in that case, the buyer will ask the seller to leave that behind. So that can be written up in the purchase contract. And so these things can be negotiated between the buyer and seller. Okay. So that would be an inclusion. So the buyer will ask their agent to say, hey, can they leave this behind? So it could be a swing set, it can be above ground swimming pool, it could be, piece of furniture, it could be a couch, it could be dining room table and chairs that maybe the buyer really likes, or pieces of furniture or decor that work really well with the house. So this happens sometimes with the show homes when, let's say, the buyer is looking at a show home, just the way they have organized everything or the way they have put things together, the pieces that they have put into place sometimes they go really well with the property. And so sometimes the buyers will say, oh, I would like the furniture with the house as well. So in this case, the buyer's agent can negotiate that with the seller. So sometimes if it's a small piece, right, the sellers will say, don't worry about it, we'll just leave it behind. But if it's something expensive, let's say in a show home, it's all brand new furniture. So the seller won't just give it to the buyer. So they will say, we'll give it to you for X amount of dollars. So you can negotiate that, right? So you'll say, okay, the buyer will pay an extra 10,000 or 20,000 for all the furniture and everything that's included. And you want to itemize that. So that's an example of an inclusion, okay? Exclusions are attached items that the seller is taking with them. Okay, inclusions are unattached items that either the seller is leaving behind with the property, or the buyer wants the seller to leave behind with the property. So that's the difference.
So if a person has and I think another time you told us if there's any lien on them, so they either the buyer or the seller has to pay for it before they can keep it, right? Yeah. So if it's like a fridge that they bought new and there is an owing,
yes.
Then
okay, so let me address that. Okay, so any kind of inclusions that the seller is leaving behind with the property have to be free of encumbrances, which means those items cannot be on a payment plan, right? If the seller is including them with the property, there have to be no liens, no payment plans. So if there's a fridge that has a payment plan on it, right? So they went to like Brick or something and they purchased the fridge and they got it on installments and there's still installments owing. In that case, they cannot include that with the property. So in this, they have two options. One, they can pay off the fridge and then they can include it, or they can exclude it from the property because it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to Brick, technically.
Okay, so then could a seller tell the buyer's agent that they would give them extra money in order to take over or to like to pay it, or no?
So generally it's better for the seller to pay it off because it's under seller's name and becomes like a little bit problematic.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.